Bonjour à toutes.
Good morning. Good morning. We're opening the session called Setting 2030 as the Climate Horizon. To introduce the session briefly, as you know, this was said several times in various sessions beforehand in X. The last IPCC report draws the alarm. You know, it says we don't do enough, we don't do it fast enough, and the global warming is speeding up. Well, the views of the economists that, well, the reason is simple. Climate is, in fact, a global public good, and to preserve the means that we would have cooperative and coordinated policies. It's a global common good, but we should define a horizon, an objective of efforts, and to share it among all the participants. Being said like that is rather simple, but the effort, you know it. Well, that is decarbonation. Participants, you know them as well, are the 200 countries sitting around the table, and it is with them that we need to agree. So we found a method. We thought we had found a method called the Paris Agreement, which claimed a global joint common objective, but the Paris Agreement did not implement the two elements mentioned as an absolute necessity, that is coordination and cooperation. No coordination, because if you take the total sum of all the commitments made by the various nations, you'd certainly not achieve the reduction of emission that would ensure the well, not too catastrophic climate transition, even if the commitments were complied with, and lack of cooperation, because we did not find a way to be certain that countries would walk the talk and do what they said they would do. So the question of 2030 is not just a date mentioned by the Europeans, in good French, what they call the Fit for 55 package. This decarbonation horizon for the European industry, less than 55% emission versus 1990. You know, it was said that minus 50%. I mean, minus 50, 55 versus 1990. So it's not as strong as less than 55% versus today. So don't panic. But this 2030 horizon is the result of 15 years of success of the Paris Agreement, and it's the start of a time watch, because in 2030 there will be 2 decades left to reach the carbon neutrality, and the minus 55 horizon is feasible, but from 2030 to 2050, it's going to be more difficult, because the slope is steeper, and we will have to remove the last emission-producing systems, and that won't be a marginal cost. Is civil society, are the economic players here, will they be capable to achieve this energy transition that probably policies alone will not make it possible to achieve? So to deal with, we have a video capsule. We are modern people in X, and this video capsule, a little shot with Inger Andersen from the PNUD will, the UNDP, sorry, will say that. Then we'll have Adair TURNER, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and I think we do need that, who will talk about, will give us a video, will talk with us on video, but around the table, physically, Jacques Le Pape, who is the president of the Reassurance Central Office, Olivier Jobert, who is a senior partner in the Boston Consulting Group, Claire Desan, who is not listening to me, and who is chatting with who is the Secretary General of NG, and finally, the other one who was not listening, Adair TURNER, who is Chairman State Secretary to the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and who will take the floor in English. So this has been said. I leave the floor to the video. Thank you.
Thank you,
Climate action is crucial for tackling the interconnected triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and of course the crisis of pollution and waste. But the hard truth is that the international community is not getting a passing grade on the Paris Agreement. To keep 1.5 degrees alive, we need to almost halve emissions by 2030. And bear in mind that we set this almost a year ago. We are halfway through 2022, and frankly, we have seen virtually no progress on the Glasgow Climate Pact. No major emitters have updated their national determined contributions or NDCs. No countries have joined the coal exit. Progress on committing to electric vehicles, for example, is sluggish. We're still looking at a global temperature rise ranging from just over 2.1 degrees to close to 3 degrees Celsius, depending, of course, on the mix of net zero commitments and conditional NDCs that we implement. Anywhere in this range would, frankly, be a total catastrophe for reasons we all well understand. Now, I know that all eyes are on Ukraine, and rightly so, and the associated energy and food and finance crisis caused by the conflict. But we cannot let setbacks in one country set the pathway globally. The no regression principle means that once a treaty is signed, we can't go back. It's time to use regulatory levers to accelerate green investment, not scramble to replace sources of oil and gas. In short, we know how to meet our climate commitments, and now, frankly, we need to do it. We must transform the energy and transport system. We must exit coal, back renewables and energy efficiency, and move to sustainable transport. We must transform food systems, make agriculture low carbon, resource efficient, and nature positive, and of course, cut food waste and loss. We must back nature in decision-making because nature-based solutions can provide a large proportion of the mitigation effort out to 2030. And this, by the way, includes bringing nature into our cities to cool them, to help cities adapt to climate change, and to make cities more livable. And we must back circularity and sustainable consumption and production. And here let me say that the international deal on plastic pollution under negotiations could make a big difference to climate change and set a clear model for the circular economy. And we must boost adaptation support to help developing countries deal with climate impacts that are already locked in. And of course, we must deliver on our promise and the climate finance that we promised back in 2009 and re-promised at COP21 in 2015. It's time to have that 100 billion every year on the table. And then we must redesign the entire financial system in support of all these transformations. Look, I'm not saying that we made no progress at all. Under the Science Based Targets Initiative, over 340 companies have committed to setting net zero targets across their operations and value chains. And the UNEP Finance Initiative convenes 3 finance sectors, net zero alliances, and is mobilizing financial institutions to transition their holdings and their portfolios into alignment with the 1.5 degree, a move that makes complete sense for those who do not wish to end up holding significant stranded assets. And around 400 cities have committed to net zero emissions by 2050. 92 companies have joined EV 100, a worldwide initiative seeking to accelerate the transition to electric vehicle by 2030. In many places around the world, it's already cheaper to get electricity from solar than from fossil fuels. But you'll notice here that I'm saying committed. These are promises. I'm saying seeking to. These are also promises. But what we really need now is more implementation. This year must be the year that kicks off the action era, including at the upcoming COP27 in Egypt. We have the knowledge and means to address climate change. We have the commitments. We have the momentum for change in the growing popular support and youth movements. With reinvigorated multilateralism and the knowledge that we must treat the triple planetary crisis as a single challenge, we can get the job done, but only if we begin to act on the commitments made, and act now.
clear. We need to act now, and we had a long to-do list. With no further ado, I will now give the floor to Adair TURNER. And now put the question to you, and I can guess the answer, because we talked about that before in what was said. There was the two words, you know, stranded assets, you know, the stranded assets. It is that a certain number of equipment, capitals, or field, gas field or oil field will have to be abandoned. You know, this is lost capital. As an economist, you know, I thought that there was a risk, a financial risk, you know, major financial risk, at least a question. But I know that Mr. Turner has certain diverging views. So this is the question I'm putting to you. Don't we do too much about this of the stranded assets, Mr. Turner?
In Aix, I hope you can hear me. I think when we think about the investment issue of getting to net zero, there is a stranded asset issue, but it's not the most important. In order to build a zero carbon economy by 2050, the world has to invest probably about a gross level of $4 trillion per annum on average over the next 30 years. And we actually know where the vast majority of that investment need is. About 3/4 of it, and that is our figures from the Energy Transition Commission that I chair, but it is also the figures of the International Energy Agency and everybody else that has looked at it. About 3/4 of the $4 trillion per annum is building a bigger, new, zero carbon electricity system, primarily from renewables, but there will also be roles for nuclear and hydro as well. More generation, more transmission, more distribution. I think we have to realize that even in rich developed countries, the only way to get to a zero carbon economy is for us to consume and use and produce about twice as much electricity as at the moment. In India, it's 5 or 6 times. In Africa, it's 10 or 15 times. And the most important issue in finance is, where is the finance going to come from to build that new electricity system? And that underpins everything else. For instance, we know now how to produce zero carbon steel using hydrogen as the reduction agent rather than coking coal. But when you look at the investments required to build a global zero carbon steel system, and we are about to produce a report on this, about 80% of them don't reside in the steel company assets themselves. They reside in the green hydrogen production for those steel companies, but indeed the renewable energy which drives the green hydrogen production. So let's be clear, our biggest issue is not stranded assets, it is the new assets that we need on a massive scale in order to achieve a zero carbon economy. It is also true, however, that there are things that we've got to stop doing. We at present invest about 800 billion a year in the fossil fuel system. And that includes investments still sadly in coal mines, still sadly in coal plants and in new oil and gas fields. It's absolutely clear on the coal side that we have got to stop investing in new coal immediately and, as the Glasgow COP26 conference agreed, to begin the phase down of existing coal. That will create, as we phase down existing coal, some assets which will have to be written off. And there is a big issue about how the rich developed world provides funds to compensate some lower income developing countries for the closure of coal plants, coal power plants, before end of useful life. But the bigger issue, and I think the issue on which insurance companies, asset managers, banks are now struggling, is what should their attitude be to new oil and gas development. The International Energy Agency, led by Fatih Birol, has clearly said that if we are serious about 1.5 degrees centigrade, there should be no new investment at all in new oil and gas developments. But of course, in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there are many people saying that we should now develop new gas assets. Our strong belief at the Energy Transition Commission is that we need to be very cautious of that, and that broadly speaking, the IEA is right, that we should now be in an environment where we develop no new oil and gas. There will continue to be some investment to maintain production from existing fields for a time. But to give you an idea of what is required, if we are to get to net zero by 2050, we will have to reduce the use of oil by about 80 or 90% by then, down to, say, 15 million barrels of oil a day. And we will need to reduce gas use by 40%. So we will only do that if we now start cutting out the new investment in oil and gas quite dramatically. Because if we don't, that will create either a stranded asset or an asset which, if it isn't stranded, if it goes on being used, will make it completely impossible to meet our climate targets. But I return to my first point. Yes, there is an issue on stranded assets. Yes, there is an issue about ceasing that investment in new oil and gas. But the even more important issue is that we will not get to a zero carbon economy where we need to be by 2050 and where we need to be by 2030 unless we accelerate quite dramatically the pace at which we build a zero carbon electricity system. And that is where the big number of investment is required.
Merci beaucoup, c'est absolument...
Thank you very much. Clear?
La priorité est ce qui va coûter très cher, vous avez donné.
Priority will be very expensive. What will be to build those new electrical systems that will make it possible to have a better electrification of all the systems, and this is highly complicated, well, in advanced countries as well as in developing countries. So, before doing this and to see how we could do this, well, there was a call early on to the insurance companies and the bankers not to finance new oil and gas fields, or if we want to get to net zero in 2050. But insurance companies, I think, have another topic, that global change anyway has an impact on their activities. And Jacques Le Pape will be able to explain to us how is this perceived on the insurance side. Thank you. Hello. What I have from the first speaker, that we have to move to action. If we remember the hair and the torches, you know, to discussion is good, but the acting is better. Of course, we are more downstream in the system, because we are as the public reassurance company that will help French insurance companies to indemnify compensate French families when they are victims of natural disasters. So this is the result of climate change, of course, because now for several decades we can see that there are more and more natural disasters and more people to be compensated for or to be reimbursed. So what we do is we help insurance companies to back them up when there is a major disaster, natural disaster, set the cost, pay the cost, for example, floods or drought on the other side, you know, about these cracks you see in houses, for example. This is what you see because of the drought, when there is a shrinking and expansion of clay, or because of due to the fact that the drought is fiercer some years, and floods and hyperhydration of the ground is unforeseeable. So this is the basic work of the reinsurance company and our group, and we get downstream, where we look at the consequences of what was mentioned early on. So the decision, actually, in all those main issues is essential for people, and we are bearing witness, and we are witness of that. And thanks to the 20 euros provided by each French families through their damage insurance premium, well, we can indemnify 1.3 billion per year for due to catastrophes or disasters. So it's a concrete issue. And what we see as well is that because of the trends mentioned and because of the fact we are more in the discussion than in the action as such of the main topics we will discuss later on, nuclear, not nuclear, you know, climate change is one thing, but we see the consequences and the impacts, and together with Météo France, the French weather forecast system, our company has designed a model which makes it possible to look at the, you know, what can wait and what cannot wait, and the impact for French households of the risk of that we reinsure. Well, there's an inflation in addition to the monetary inflation of 1.5%. And this, you know, that what can be anticipated between now and 2050. So basically, today it costs you 1.3 billion per year, and all things being equal, you know, in constant euro, we know this will cost at least 2 billion. So question is, and this is where we look back with the general issue problematics, how do we prevent that? Well, several methods do exist. The unpleasant one, you know, you increase the premium. Another one which is painful, to reduce the payment when there is a problem. But there is another one which is more interesting and which corresponds to the choices to be made. It's prevention. And I would like to be concrete. Prevention is like the three little piglets. I mean, did you build your house in straw or in bricks and cement? Because, of course, when you build dikes or banks to make sure that the last floods in the city where you're the mayor, if you have dikes or embankments, well, the next flood there will be less impact, so it will be better for everybody. So it might be more concrete than the major energy choices, more short-term vision, but it's doable. And we do believe that in order to finance or to avoid the overcost of 2 billion euros that we foresee between now and 2050, prevention is one of the good methods. There is a governmental fund where we have a key role to play, 100 million per year, which makes it possible to finance works and structures. And we believe that 100 million per year will be able to save in the long term more than 100 million per year for the in the overcost of natural disaster to be feared. Back to the three piglets, you know, the Milan law provides us with a new basis for construction of new houses in France, which should make it possible when it comes to new buildings to minimize the impact of cracks in the houses, of drought, which anyway is here, and which is stronger and harder than it was in the past. So our contribution to the discussion is, anyway, someone will pay. Let's try to take precaution to avoid the nasty bill, you know. So let's act quickly and make decisions rapidly. Thank you very much. Adaptation, and now. So now we talked about the households. They're not the only one concerned, but let's talk about the businesses now. And I will ask Frédérik JOBERT, within this environment, what are the good strategies from the firms to be, I don't like the word, but you know, it summarizes, to be resilient, even though I don't like that word, in this new environment. Thank you. Good morning. Well, I think you, Inger, and yourself, Jacques, you said it. 2030 horizon is 8 years, minus 50% in 8 years. It's spectacular. So therefore, we cannot minimize, you know, just bet on the future, but we have to be in action, move into action, and to plan the action, to implement them, to assess the impact month per month, year per year, and possibly correct trajectories. This is the problem of ecological and energy planification. And at the level of businesses, the transformation plans, which are being implemented like any business plan in the past. You know, in the past they had growth plan. Now we have climate transformation plans. The method is the same, basically, to be acting. Now, when following your question, two convictions concerning business strategies, and I'm sure it will echo in What and how? What? Well, that is the content of the business strategies, the climate-linked transformation. Two ways to look at it. First is to decarbonate whatever exists, to consider, to model and a supply chain, a production line, and systematically implement all the technologies, techniques known to remove carbon from that, renewable energies, nuclear power plant, electrical powers, hydrogen, carbon capture, biomass, artificial intelligence will stop.
Bien sûr qu'il faut le faire, encore une fois.
Of course, this needs to be done. We have to act. But what is interesting is that the 2030 horizon, unfortunately, is not consistent with the time frame for that approach. It's not fast enough. So we can dispute it. Some sectors are moving on faster than others. But one of the key points of that transformation is to reach 100% of renewable or renewably sourced or nuclear-sourced electricity. So, as you said, we have to actually convert some of our usages to electric. So, you can measure the gap between 34% and 100 because we are currently at 34%. But 10 years ago, the share of renewable energy, renewable plus nuclear, was 32% 10 years ago. It's gone up by 2% over the last 10 years. And at the end of the day, we only have one planet, and global warming is very much accelerating. So you see that we have our work cut out. And 30 years ago, that share of renewable and nuclear energy was 36%. So we've actually moved backward. So this is definitely not changing fast enough. It imposes on us to rethink a number of things and to imagine new ways of practicing capitalism, thinking up new business models, thinking up new ways of generating value for our customers. And this is not esoteric. It is bioeconomics. It's the business model of reusing rather than buying systematically. For private companies to really rise to the challenge, decarbonizing what's already existing is not enough. That's the first point I wanted to make. For companies to be able to engineer these transformations, they need to be able to fund it, and Mr. Turner mentioned it. Costs and revenues have to be consistent because these companies need to be viable, and that's the whole point of the regulatory framework standards. I think we'll come back to that. It's also everything to do with carbon tax, subsidies, so we can lament that it's not moving on fast enough. But our second belief, if you will, is that there are men and women who accept to take on these new jobs or the jobs from the past, industrial jobs, labor, manual labor that we've forgotten a bit about. And we need customers. We need demand for these new business models, these new ways of creating values. We need people who accept circular economy and to put as much value on a second-hand product than for a brand new product, who fully buy into sustainable development and a sustainable economy. So we need to really operate a paradigm shift, a cultural shift, and create a new culture. And maybe to use a simile, it is like a prisoner that is on a lifelong sentence, I'm not going to buy this product because I don't have the purchasing power for that. I'm not going to invest in that new plant, because it's going to cost too much money. So actually, we all are reluctant to make the necessary effort. And we need actually to put in more effort, all and every one of us. So we need to do more, and the right way to do this is to do things differently, not replacing home delivery of pizzas by motorbike, by electric scooters. That's not enough. Claire, you are at the helm, representing ENGIE here to tell us about paradigm shifts in the energy sector. So when we talk about 2030, there's what can be done right now in the short term and what can be done in the medium and long term. New ways of producing and using gas so that we might move on to a fully electrified economy, as Mr. Turner mentioned and wished for. Well, I won't talk about gas only, but a comment. I'm quite happy to add a bit of gender equality in this panel because, you know, this transition that we want that we advocate for will be made possible by men and women. Well, we need a business model that is fully adapted and fully in line with energy transition. It's been said before, but it needs to be reasserted. It is the condition for sustainability and capacity to and thus to create jobs and growth and in the long term. It's really a long haul effort. So we shouldn't only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. And to that end, we need to be clear on our goals. What do we mean by that? For an energy company such as ENGIE, we need to really set our objectives and then steer the course, stay the course. So decarbonization by 2045 and a trajectory for all of our activities that is consistent with a temperature rise of less than 2 degrees. And this is what's imperative on us to do. There are milestones in 2025, 2030, and 2025 is really around the corner. So this is about the decisions we're going to make day in, day out. So firstly, we need to be very clear on our objectives. Secondly, we need processes that guarantee that we can actually achieve it. And from that perspective, at ENGIE, we've really moved on to a steering of our carbon performance that is identical to the way we steer our financial performance. So for each and every activity, we have carbon budgets that are allocated to each business line, including for their investments. And then we have reviews on a quarterly basis. Where are we at? Taking stock in terms of our financial trajectory, but also our carbon trajectory. Of course, it's a must. So objectives and steering that has to be really a fine steering. So how do we make it happen? Well, we need to make clear choices. First choice, ENGIE exited everything to do with exploration and production of gas. That was years ago. We are currently exiting coal. It now represents less than 4% of our power production. It will be zero by 2027. So we will have completely decommissioned all our coal-powered plants. Alongside this, we try to intensify, really enhance the development of all renewables and also renewable electricity, because what is energy transition? If we take a step back, it's a drop in consumption by 40% and the development of a green energy for electricity and gas. We are the leading developer of wind power and solar power in France, and we want to multiply twofold our installed capacity from 3 gigawatts to 6 gigawatts. And we also want to develop green gas. Why? Because all economic models go to show it, and all the scenarios demonstrate that gas can play a role in energy transformation, because there will be a diversification of usages. We talked about cars, but alongside that, there are a number of usages that are difficult to move to electricity. Steel production, for example, there's a number of industries for which it is a lot easier and less costly. The ton of carbon is a lot easier to eradicate if we use renewable gas rather than electric technologies. It's true for heavy industry, and it's true for a number of heavy mobility. So gas will be useful, but they need to become greener, biomethane and green hydrogen. I'll speed up a bit because I don't want to speak for too long. To exit carbon, intensify electric and renewable electric, and we have the capacity to completely do without Russian sourcing of gas by 2030. And I'd like to add on a positive note, that call for action, you know, sometimes it doesn't translate into actions at state levels because there's a number of diverging interests. So from COP to COP, there are always weak links. But if you look at companies, at local governments, local communities, there's a strong demand. And we are in capacity to really speed things up. So this can be done, and that's the contribution we can make. Deploying our renewable energy, electricity, gas, exit coal, and come up with solutions for decarbonization to others. Thank you. Well, you can see how why it's so important to have women sitting on these panels, because between Ms. Anderson and Ms. WAYSAND, they strike a positive note and help us see the path towards a more sustainable society. Sven GIEGOLD, the interest for the point of having a German Secretary of State on this panel is to reflect on discrepancies between our countries. So talking about energy mix, how we can get organized to achieve our goals. So France, of course, has put a lot of eggs in the nuclear basket. In Germany, you've always had a much lower share of nuclear energy. And some people say that Germans actually bore the brunt of the cost of the development of renewables in Europe. How do you see the right way to meet our objectives? So decarbonization by 2050. So we'll be delighted to hear your viewpoint. And this is not a veiled criticism. We need you to explain how it's going to work. All right. I'll try and speak French. I guess it'll be easier to chat with my fellow panelists. I'm not sure, actually. If we are a bit provocative and crack a joke, really, both countries, France and Germany, are actually phasing out nuclear. If I look at the figures on both sides, there is energy friendship between our two countries. And thanks to the difficulties of some nuclear plants over here in France, our will to phase out nuclear is made even stronger in Germany. But all jokes aside, I'm a fairly conservative person, you know. I live in a small village north of Germany. It's usually cold out there. There's not much sun. But having said that, if I see on my smartphone, you know, as a family, I have a picture of my family, but I can always see the figures of renewable energy. We've invested in renewables, and it represents tenfold our consumption. Our region is not very rich. It's sort of average. But our region is still going to become a big producer of renewable energy. More and more neighbors use their roofs to become energy producers. And this is what my family has done. It's the prosumer movement. And you see the same trend in Poland. It's really interesting to see that in the most conservative regions, there's a lot of investment in renewables by private citizens. And so this conditions the success of energy transition for the more disadvantaged areas. Energy transition cannot work if it's only about costs. There has to be an economic, industrial, and social strategy backing it up. Energy transition is something that, if it's only seen as something that's going to prove to be very costly, then it's never going to work in the end. We have to have business models that are profitable to make it efficient and unlock the forces of capitalism to help us completely phase out fossil fuels. And this is what is at the heart of the strategy of the German government. We passed a bill in record times, the Easter package, and that package is going to really unlock a wave of investment in renewables and towards more energy efficiency. And thanks to that package, we will become renewable energy producers up to 80% renewable by 2030. And we're going to electrify heat systems in buildings and in a big chunk of the industry and automotive industry. Our objective is to have 46 million of electric vehicles based on renewably sourced electricity by 2030. And these EVs will also be the instrument for safeguarding whenever wind power or solar energies is a bit too intermittent and not reliable. There have to be gains in competitiveness, and even in Germany, when it's cold, renewables cost less than non-renewable energies, which is why we don't stand to lose any money with nuclear, because we're going to invest, because that would be a waste of money from our viewpoint to invest in nuclear. We are going to invest in new renewables in a country that is not very big, that is rather cold in terms of weather and densely populated. It is our clear will to invest in renewables, and we're on the same page with our industries and our leading companies, and the society is also behind us. We have a clear will to really push for that all together. Thank you very much Well, as you know, in X, we are fortunate enough to have economic journalists who follow up on all the debates. So I think tomorrow what's going to make the headlines will be the speech by Bruno Le Maire. But I think on that same headlines, it will be featured that France is going to exit, to phase out nuclear. That for sure should be on the first page. So I'll give you the floor for 5 minutes each before we wrap up. There's a question that I have on my iPad, which ties in nicely with questions put in other sessions. You didn't talk about the carbon price. Do you think it is the absolute condition to make everything possible? Who'd like to go first? Claire, maybe? It's a very good question. We mentioned it implicitly because we said that regulatory framework that regulatory framework is absolutely essential for energy transition to be possible. So the price of carbon is absolutely essential. What do we mean by that? When you emit greenhouse gas emissions, you have to pay to compensate for these emissions. So it's the polluter pays principle. And this is a mechanism that is extremely powerful, potentially, to encourage companies and the whole society to decarbonize and to encourage them to decarbonize their production tools. So as an energy company, we are fully convinced that the price of carbon is a main driver to move towards that decarbonized economy. Having said that, there are social aspects and issues of redistribution that are absolutely essential and that should be tackled. We haven't mentioned that, but the acceptance, the buy-in for of that energy transition is absolutely essential, so that all the local communities can buy into that strategy, because energy, of course, and fuel prices are at the heart of the household budget. Well, price of carbon, regulation, what do you advocate for? Well, this clearly resonates. Let me talk about our daily behavior. Just walk outside the park and walk in the street. And walking down the street, you'll see people who drive alone, that hotel rooms have air conditioning during the day, even though they're empty. So I might sound a bit provocative, but our day-to-day behavior does not really factor in the energy crisis we are in the throes of. We seem to think that energy still comes at a very low price, so we need a price of carbon to put that behind us. Well, that's very clear. Jacques. Well, I can only repeat and reiterate what I said before. Price of carbon is a major incentive, and because at the end of the day, there's a bill that needs to be footed. So you need to anticipate, and people should get organized, and they're free to do what they want to do. But if they want to spend money to finance the energy transition, well, and fight climate change, why not? I find it a bit funny, to be honest, because next week and last week, we've already voted as Council of the European Union with emission trading scheme, rising the price of carbon. So we reached a consensus within the Council of the European Union, and revenue, proceeds from this should be invested to help households transition, especially households that are from more disadvantaged backgrounds. Because if we don't do that, there'll be a social backlash, as we've seen with the Yellow Vest movement in France. So we have to learn the lesson from that. We have to compensate and decompensate at the same time. Right, with that wrapping up, I was asked to make an announcement. It will seem funny to you, but since we're talking about redistribution, globalization, I've been asked to announce that Lionel FONTAGNE will be signing his excellent book about the impact of globalization on labor markets, on your pay slip, and on your purchasing power. That wonderful book that is entitled Pay Slips and Shopping Trolleys. If you want to buy it, go to the bookshop booth that is further down in the park. Thank you very much to all speakers. I think this was great, very interesting conversation, and this announcement that will be on the front page of daily newspapers. Nuclear.